Well, look at that. It's 7 o'clock. Shall we begin?
Let's roll.
All right. Welcome to the St. Augustine Orchid Society virtual show table for April. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your pictures of beautiful orchids. This is a picture from Steve. He didn't have the name on it, but it sure is a looker. Welcome to our new members, Sandra, Jean, Maria, and Catherine. And once again, we have the great Courtney Hackney here to tell us some stories about these orchids.
I think the one facet of the first slide that caught my eye was Rocky Point, North Carolina, because that's where we lived for quite a few years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I didn't know there were any other orchid growers there at the time, but it just brought back some old memories.
That's always a good thing.
So let's get started. If there's any name that I wish would never have happened, it's the naming of the Phalaenopsis dendrobium, because it just, everyone who gets into orchids knows what a Phalaenopsis is, and somehow they just associate dendrobiums with Phalaenopsis, which is not the case. They're not related at all. It's a very, very distant relationship, but you can kind of see when you look at them, if you know some of the Phalaenopsis species, you can see why that's happened. And as you say, this is a really beautiful clone. It's a shame the name is gone. And it's so distinct that it may be possible to find it, that really intensely colored lip. That's an indigo lip, and this is kind of an indigo flower. I mean, that might be something that one could find. Of course, as this is a new hybrid, it may not be registered. A lot of the Taiwanese crosses, they're not registering both Phalaenopsis and dendrobiums, just not registering.
Steve says he got it in Hilo at a garden shop for $10.
You know, I've seen some of the most beautiful orchids in the world in Hilo. I know exactly what shop he was in, because I could have brought home 10 or 15 there. They're all 10 or 15 bucks in bloom, and unique things. That was what was fun. Okay, next. I think we must have more members with this particular species, Dendrobium ladeggiesii. And I guess I can see why. The flowers are really distinct and beautiful. And of all the types of dendrobiums we have that are difficult to grow, this one seems to be one that blooms, even for people who have a hard time giving it exactly conditions they want. But it's very, very nice. And this is Leslie's.
That's the hugest flower of that type dendrobium I have ever seen.
Well, it is large, and that's one of the reasons it's so popular. And it's a vigorous grower. I mean, you can just look at this plant, and the canes without leaves have the flowers, but look at all those new growths coming. It's gonna just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they also get new growths attached to the old bulbs, so they make a mass of a plant in no time at all. Okay, next. The nobiles, the nobile dendrobiums, they are striking too. I think many people find them a little harder to grow, but this is Dendrobium Comet King. And if there's anything that's happened perhaps in this group that's really important, it's the fact that there's been a lot of hybridizing to make them easier to grow and easier to flower. I just remember the first time I saw these come into the US and be at shows, people wouldn't even touch them because they said they were impossible to bloom here. But I think it's just a matter of learning what they need. And we have some programs where we talk about what nobile type dendrobiums need. And some of the species have some little idiosyncrasies, but most of the hybrids bloom fairly easily. Next. Dendrobium Love Memory. This is yours, Sue. Here's a good example of a hybrid that has essentially been produced especially for those of us who don't grow them very well, but you're growing this extremely well and blooming it very well. And this is a clone I've seen several times in different places. And almost every time I see it, it's about as pretty a dendrobium as you will see in this group. Okay, next. Dendrobium Issy Pearl. This is a primary hybrid. And the thing that's striking about this is the color or lack thereof. This is an albiform. And I'm pretty sure that most of this cross were not albiforms, but it's possible that one or both of those parents were. But that is a very nicely grown, nicely flowered. And if you look carefully, you can see there's a dozen or more buds that haven't even opened yet. This is yours, and you probably have it full of flowers now. So,
It was beautiful.
okay, next. Dendrobium golden aya. This is one of the few dendrobiums that I have grown fairly well. I'm not a dendrobium grower, but an old friend who's deceased now gave me a piece, and I fully expected to kill it. And no matter what I did, it just thrived, and it flowered just like this with all those beautiful yellow flowers. It's straightforward to grow this into a very mature plant. And the only downside to these type of dendrobiums that I could see is that as you grow them to maturity, to get them to a plant that can get a CCM type award, they just take up a lot of space if you really want them to grow into that type of plant, because you need light coming from all directions. But that's grown very, very well. And that's a beautiful, beautiful hybrid. Next. It's impressive how many different dendrobiums we have this time, and we're seeing some different types here. The Kingianum is from Australia, and it had a reputation of being fairly hard to grow. But I think that many of our growers in this area have mastered it. And we're also seeing some second generation Kingianum, or maybe even more, those that have been grown from seed multiple generations in culture. And this is Sheila's plant, and being grown extremely well. And this is it looks to me like it's a white form or a very, very light lavender form. Most of the time there's a little pink that you can see in these flowers. And there's below it is Specio Kingianum, a Kingianum hybrid. I know Fred Clark got very interested in growing these and hybridizing the Kingianum with other things. And so we're seeing a lot of Kingianum hybrids, first generation and second generation. And it will be interesting to see what they end up producing as time goes by, what more they can do with Kingianum. But it's a beautiful species and produces beautiful plants that grow well. And then let's see, up at the top, top right, we have Hilda-Poxin Speciosum bitetragonum. And here you see the different types of flower forms that are coming from the tetragonum. Just really nice. I think that's coming from the tetragonum.
Oh yeah.
I know I looked it up, and it's got that real strong dominant form.
Yeah.
And that's Janice's. As I said, our members are growing all kinds of dendrobiums, and it's pretty nice to see how well they're growing them. They're not just keeping them alive. Okay, next. And Cymbidiums. Cymbidium enzancera, variety Albion. Much as I say I don't grow Cymbidiums, I really do appreciate how beautiful they are. And this is extremely well grown. This is Steve's. Different color patterns on Cymbidiums are not uncommon. They're not all the same, which is one of the things that makes them so interesting to me. This is a species, Floribundum, crossed with a hybrid. And from here, it looks like it is a vigorous plant. And I'm not sure how large the plant is, but I suspect this is a little smaller growing plant from the Floribundum. But we'll have to get Steve to tell us whether it is or not. But beautiful and beautifully grown.
Beautiful leaves too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't see hardly a mark on the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next. Love the name of this, Bunny Gone Berserk, Somerset. This is Diane Winter's clone. And again, you see the variation that comes in the Cymbidiums. Really, depending on what species in the background, you can get a lot of different color forms and shapes, and even differing ways in which the inflorescences are held versus upright or decumbent hanging down. Nice little spots on the lip and on the petals there, or the sepals there on the lateral sepals. Really interesting flowers. I wonder how many flowers you get on a stem on this particular cross. No matter what, I love the name, Bunny Gone Berserk. I think that Bunny may be the grower's name. It bloomed it for the first time. Okay, next. Oncidium intergenerics. I have to say, of all the groups that I was very happy to see lumped together, the intergenerics are one naming that I appreciate, because there used to be so many different names, and they're all so closely related in terms of genetics that most of them are now oncidiums. And here's a good example. This is Oncidium tan. Can't quite see what the rest of that name
Tan
is.
treasures.
Tan treasures, lavender picotee. And I say this every month because we always have one of these beautiful intergenerics. The hybridizers just did a phenomenal job of bringing out the best characteristics of about a dozen different species that are fairly closely related, producing different shapes, forms, colors, spots. It's as variable as you can imagine, much more variable than Phalaenopsis, in my opinion, because you have so many different shapes that you can get. And to make this even better, these are really good growers. They're perfect for new hobbyists who are just graduating from Phalaenopsis and want to try something else. Fairly easy, and they're available and pretty inexpensive too. Okay, next. Oncidium wyedianum. This is a strikingly different oncidium, and you can see it used to be in a different group, but it is clearly within the Oncidium alliance from a genetic standpoint. This is Bonnie Armstrong's from Tennessee, right?
Yep,
Remember
Tennessee.
that? Yeah, and that lip on that just makes me want to kiss it. It's so pretty. So, and I suspect this is probably sweet, but I don't know this species at all. It reminds me of some of the oncidiums that grow in really dry habitats to some degree, but I'm pretty sure this isn't one of them. It may be an oncidium that likes a little cooler weather, but it was hard to figure that out from the descriptions. Okay, next. Oncidium heaven sent redolence. This is a Sherry Baby hybrid. Sherry Baby was that clone that came along, gosh, I guess it's been 25 or 30 years ago, that had the most amazing fragrance. Initially, there was one clone that they must have made 1 million of. Virtually all of us had one, and we had it because of the fragrance. And it's been used to make a lot of really nice hybrids. It's got one parent in the background that always dominates for fragrance. And it's interesting that it has been a dominant trait that's being passed along. I don't really know how many generations it'll go and still produce that wonderful fragrance, but produces heads of flowers depending on the cross. But Sherry Baby makes a really good parent. And you can see the flowers here. They're much bigger than the original Sherry Baby. And it looks like the inflorescence is much shorter too, which was one of the issues with the original Sherry Baby clones. Okay, next. Equitant oncidianae. Let's see, how many people do we have represented here? We have Leslie, who I know loves these things, and Janice has got one down in the bottom right. But every time I look at these, I just can't help but think about what the original species looked like and how the hybridizers just figured out how to manipulate the different species to get the right colors. And the shape is coming from a species called Pulchellum, which can be way in the background, and the red coming from a different species, adding to the shape. But these come in everything from beautiful soft pink to yellow, bars and stripes and everything else. And they're fairly easy to grow and very easy to kill, which is why we don't have a lot of the old clones around. They just are a little hard to keep alive for a long time. They do not like pesticides. They get infested by scale, which is why most people kill them, trying to treat the scale with pesticides. But they rot very easily. And if you just think about the Bahamas, if you've ever been to any of the islands in the Bahamas where it's hot, rains in the afternoon, and dry winters, if you just can duplicate that, you can usually grow them pretty well. The roots need to be exposed to air very quickly after you water them. So no heavy medium. Beautiful, beautiful clones. Next. intermediate variety Orlata. This is the clone Crown Fox. I'm going to have some photos next month of the different forms of intermedia. This is a really interesting form because this is one that came around kind of late. And the Orlata simply means that the very part of the column has color that goes all the way and almost touches at the top, whereas most of the intermedias don't have that. And the Orlata, the variety Orlata, that's where that comes from. So if you buy one that says Orlata, you should see that pigment going all the way up around the column. This is Susan's and being grown extremely well. Not sure how many flowers there are, but I see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and there's probably some more hiding there somewhere. And that's about as well as you can grow that. And these are very easy to grow. They grow and they love heat. They love rain. You almost can't kill these putting them outside unless you have them in a dense medium. Grow this very much like you do some of the bifoliate cattleyas. They like to drain fast.
Yeah,
Next.
beautiful leaves on that one too.
That's almost perfect.
Yeah.
Cattleya ludimaniana. This is Allen Blacks. The lutees are closely related to mossy, and they grow very close to each other in geography, except one's a little higher or on the other side of the mountain than another. Most of them are lavender and beautiful. This is one of the species that has really dark forms, but this is not one of them. This is an albinistic. We'd probably call this a semi-alba. And I'm guessing just looking at the two names, these are two select clones that had this little striping in the lip, a lot of yellow, a beautiful semi-alba. And I'm looking at the leaves and it looks like Alan's growing this in lots of light because they will grow far better with lots of light than low light. And sometimes if you have semi-albas and you grow them in lower light, you'll see a little hint of pink in the petals and sepals. But I see absolutely none in this one. This looks like a very crystalline white clone with a colored lip. That's very nice, Alan. 5-inch wide flowers are pretty good size for this. And most of you aren't familiar with the different breeders and growers in South America. But Armando Montellini has one of the best collections that you will ever imagine. That was a question from Deborah. Will he lose the leaves? No, you can get leaves that'll be pretty yellowed from intense sunlight, and they'll keep photosynthesizing unless you get them so hot that it kills the cells in the leaves. Next, Bob Betts. We have two versions of Bob Betts. One on the top, let's see, that's Honolulu, and the one on the bottom is York. York is the more better known, I should say, the better known clone. And this used to be available from Hauserman. They had it for years and years on their list. The Honolulu, I don't know. And the one thing about the York clone that is most important is that it was one of the original ones. And that's significant because the original cross says Bowbells by Mossy, but the Mossy that they used turned out was not a Mossy. It was a hybrid between Mossy and ludimaniana. So when it was remade with Mossy, often they didn't get nearly as good of flowers. But that one there in Honolulu looks like it's going to be a pretty nice round flower. So that may be one of the original ones. A beautiful, beautiful white with a yellow lip. And there's a lot of yellow in that lip on the York clone, which is one of the reasons I like it so much. Really sets off the color.
Mm-hmm.
And the one up top is Sheila's, and the one down below is
That's Sheila's too.
Sheila's too. Okay.
She volunteers at that Phipps Conservatory and helps replant, and she gets lots of back bulbs from there.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I mean that's a lot of the old arboretums have many of the old clones. In fact, they were probably one of the places that so many of these old clones survived. So we have them because of them. Okay, next. Ranger 6 AOK. Here we have the continued line breeding that came really from Bowbells. And this is Sue Broussard's. Empress Bells, I think, is one of the direct ancestors or offspring, I should say, of Bowbells. And Nakuchi That I believe is a brassicatlia. So we've got a mix of things here. And the interesting facet is that while this clone that is the best known is beautiful white with a yellow lip, and that yellow almost colors the whole lip, there are quite a few clones of this that didn't come out white because of the influence of the Nikushi in the background. But of course, what happens is whichever one is favorite in the beginning or gets an award, it gets cloned. And we very soon think that they're all white with a yellow lip. They were all nice, and they're big, big flowers. Not uncommon to see this hitting 6.5 or 7 inches in natural spread.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And being grown well, Sue. Okay, next. Here we have a really old thing. This is Kathleen Patterson. The Pattersons were some of the original growers, cut flowers in New York, I think, or New Jersey. But this goes back, really to the turn of the 20th century almost. Just a gorgeous thing. Nice to see these are still alive. This is Allen's plant. Most of the clones that are around, and I have some, are virus, but don't show anything on the flowers. And so that's still worth keeping just because of what's in the background. A lot of genes that have been lost in modern hybrids are still hiding here in these old hybrids. And you can see that's just about a perfect semi-alba. Upper right is Sierra Skies Leon, and that's a mossy hybrid. And we've not really seen a lot of mossies this year. We usually have quite a few of them show up on the virtual show table or at the club. But mossy is a good spring bloomer. And what this does is produce a nice, I guess this would be cerulean, because this is supposed to be a cerulean hybrid, I believe. And it's a clone. You can get this clone reasonably inexpensively, or at least you could at one time. But it's got really nice wide petals with a little bit of that indigo coloring and an intense indigo lip. And then bottom right is Shirayuhukimi. I don't even know if I came close to that. But beautiful semi-alba, and I don't have it on my screen. I can't see what the parents of this
That's Tokyo Magic and Mildred Reeves.
That's right. When I saw that, I thought Fred Clark's responsible for this. And my curiosity was whether this was a large flower or not. I think this is a smaller flower, and Fred had been working on coming up with standard looking cattleyas that were on the white or semi-alba side. And I'm suspecting that this might be what he was thinking he was after. But a beautiful thing. That semi-alba form is one of the most desirable of all the standard cattleyas out there, or in miniatures too, and one of the hardest to find for some reason. There aren't many hybridizers that make it for some strange reason. Okay, next. This is Grant Eichler Lynette. And if you could read that, that's 7.5 inches in natural spread. That is a huge flower. And I've bloomed this for years. And what I've learned is you don't get the 7.5-inch flowers until the plant gets extremely large and very, very strong. And then typically you'll get 2 very large flowers. And like many cattleyas, when the plant gets strong, you also see what the potential is for the form. The form is better, almost overlapping petals. But this has got an HCC, and it's more or less a medium lavender, but the color on it and the size of the flowers just knocks your socks off when you see it. And of course, it's very, very fragrant too. I know, Sue, you had one at the club, I think one day. Quite a few of us have this clone. It's definitely worth having and not inexpensive. Just don't be disappointed if the first time it blooms, there aren't 7-inch flowers. Typically, the first bloom will be 4.5 or 5 inches until you get all the bulbs mature, and then you'll see some monster flowers like this. Okay, next.
Oops.
Joy Sokabi, Shining. This is an Irene Finney hybrid. Irene Finney is one of the fabulous and maybe famous old clones that was essentially the hybrid was made for the cut flower trade. But there were quite a few really exemplary clones that just popped out that were excellent, not just because they could bloom when they needed cut flowers, but also because they had nice petals and sepals. And this is a good example of that. And it made really good hybrids too. So here you see a flower that looks very much like Irene Finney with a little better form than Irene Finney had. Again, they're very fragrant, and the lips typically are very similar to this, with yellow and that fuchsia that goes with the yellow in differing amounts. So you get 5 or 6 of these, and most of what you see in variation is on the lip, not necessarily the petals and sepals. They are very uniform, and that comes from the Irene Finney, which is a mossy hybrid. Okay, next. Mahina Yahiro, this is variety Julie. It's a really unusual looking thing. And Sue had showed me a photo of one that came from a different hybrid line, but it's got this one's got this picotee all the way around the petals, all around the lip. And that's a really unusual characteristic. And the clone that Sue showed me was a different hybrid, but had that same strange characteristic and that beautiful lip. The problem typically with this kind of hybrid is getting uniformity in the hybrids. This is the one that was selected. And I want you to know, Deborah, you're going to see a better flower as this gets older. The shape will be better, but you'll keep that beautiful color. And the color appears white, but it's really a very, very pale yellow. Sometimes if you grow it really bright, you won't see any of it. And if you grow it a little darker, you'll see a little bit of that yellowish color. And the yellow typically disappears as the flower ages. But this is a beautiful clone, and it's available. It's been around for quite a while, and it's really popular. That's why people keep cloning it. Okay, next. Here's the very one I was talking about. Majestic Light by Harlequin. And you see that same kind of a lip pattern, and you see a certain amount of the shading around the outside of the petals and sepals. This is a Harlequin cross. Harlequin is a famous cross largely because there was really only one that came out beautiful. And the story is that when the cross started to bloom in V.O. Bracey's greenhouse, this is when he had his own nursery, it was so bad that he had his helper throw all of them out.
Oh my God.
And then all of a sudden, a year or so later, this one clone bloomed, and it was magnificent. And they looked at, I actually interviewed the person that worked for him. And he said they had to look at every single plant in every greenhouse looking for more of them, and there were none. They had thrown out every single one but the one that bloomed. And it made an interesting parent. It produced particularly this lip pattern, this deep, intense color. But like Harlequin, when you use Harlequin as a parent, you often get 1 or 2 magnificent things, and then that don't have all the characteristics you want. They simply have 1 or 2, like this lip. The lip is beautiful. And Sue gave me this plant so I could use it to breed with. So you can see I'm crazy too. It's such a unique character that you want to see it perpetuated in different ways. Okay, next. Tainan Gold Variety Canary. This has got an AM, and this is a Toshioki hybrid, and this is Brandon's. And you can see the Toshioki that always dominates, at least if you use one of the ones that has the flares. And you can see the flares on all petals and sepals, and then the beautiful lip. In this case, the lip is not unfolding well. That is a characteristic that is just hit or miss. Sometimes it'll bloom with the lip totally unfolded, other times not so much. But it's got something to do with the temperature and the amount of energy the plant has. And I've never been able to figure out which it is be able to take advantage of that. But it is a beautiful, beautiful flower. And it's available out there too. Next. This is an oldie but goldie. And it's an oldie in a sense that it was a miniature before miniatures even had a name. This is Seagull's Apricot. I'm not sure if this is a remake or not, and
I think
Brandon
it's
will have
from
to tell
Fred.
us.
He got it
Okay,
from Fred.
it's a remake then,
Yeah.
because the thing about the original ones, um, they were very small plants. The flowers didn't last long. They had a lot of negative characteristics, but they were beautiful little miniatures. California apricot, I'm fairly certain this is one of the old ones that Fred's using, but the coccinia that's available now are far superior to what was used to make the original Seagull's apricot. And this comes in a variety of color forms too. This one's a yellow with the orange on the periphery of the petals and sepals. But I've seen some of these that have come out nice and red, some of them almost blood red.
Huh.
So this kind of hybrid would do that. But the main reason you're seeing more reds pop out is because the coccinia that are being used now are 4Ns. So they have more influence on color and flower size. And the coccineas are much bigger in size than the ones that were used originally. So these are still miniatures and they're very nice to have. And I know Fred's doing a lot with miniatures, and so is Alan Koch. So these will be available sometime because we have these guys coming in pretty regularly. We'll see this kind of a hybrid. Okay, next. Callia brabrantiae. This is my clone, but this was bred by Kroll Smith. And brabrantiaes, it's an old hybrid. It's been around a long time. Most of the ones originally made were 2Ns. And Frank Smith decided he was going to make something really super. And he made a cross using 4N parents and 4N eclandii, 4N lotagiesii. And the lotagiesii he used was an FCC. And I was told by people who were there that there was a whole bench of these in bloom. And there were so many so good compared to what had ever been seen before. They had a hard time trying to figure out which were the best, but they've had a number of FCCs from that cross. And he's still selling these. I see these for sale at the nursery when they're in bloom, and they're all phenomenal, heavy plants, heavy flowers, thick, and they look so different from the original 2N that if I showed you my 2N plant next to this one, you wouldn't think it was the same hybrid. Each is different in many ways. It's sad that they're considered the same hybrid because they're so different, coming from a 2N versus a 4N background. But you can thank Frank Smith for these being available because they were out there and they're still available from Kroll Smith. So if you really want one of these, just go by when they're blooming, which is I guess they just went out of bloom, and you'll be able to find them. Next. Here we have an assortment of different, I would call them small stature Cattleyas. We've always had a hard time with categorizing this group of hybrids because in the judging standards, they have a minimum size or a maximum size that an orchid, a Cattleya plant can be to be a miniature. But then we have all of these clones and all these hybrids, some of them pretty complex hybrids, where they'll be right at that edge or a little over to be the size to be a miniature, but they're still small in stature. And sometimes the issue is the plant's small, but the inflorescences are fairly high, like the coronet, that's Cinnabarana by Harpophylla, that's top right. And those are pretty big flowers for a little tiny plant, because that is still, I guess, probably a true miniature, depending on what clone you have. And then up on the upper left is Carmen Cortez, and that's Guess What by Aloha Jewel. That's a nice little short thing, but it's still not quite miniature. Now on the bottom right is Rojo, Araniaca by Millerai. And you might think that that would be really a tiny thing because Millerai is small, but Araniaca lends some size to the plant. And both of them produce pretty long inflorescences. So you just see sort of different versions that hybridizers sort of produced to make some small statured plants. Now, the only downside to any of these for those looking for plants that fit into a windowsill is that they have a little taller inflorescences and they need more light to bloom well. So that's an issue for those of you trying to find things that'll fit on a windowsill, grow under lower light. And those of you that grow under lights, the inflorescence can get up and get tangled up in your lights if you're not careful. Okay, next. Morning Glory, Nodosa by Purpurata. That is such a striking cross, and it's been made over and over and over again, each time with a good Nodosa, but there's so many different forms of Purpurata that have been used that you can see all sorts of variations in that cross because of the different Purpurata clones that have been used. There's a Cerulean one, all sorts of things, but you can see this one here, Alan Davidson, is a really pretty clone. The lip has that striping that's really unusual. Even though Morning Glory has that, this one looks really dark compared to the others I've seen. Nice heads of flowers. And if there is a Cattleya that will hook somebody just getting interested in orchids, this is the one, because it's so easy to grow that every novice can grow this and get hooked on orchid collecting instantly. And it's beautiful. On the right, we have Morning Glory Morning Song Neptune. This is a Morning Glory cross with Cattleya Melody Fair, which is probably my favorite semi-alba. Beautiful lip. This has got the best of both. And I'm guessing these are pretty good sized flowers because Melody Fair is a Horace cross. Pretty decent petals. Just look at the difference in the petals. The Morning Song has almost eliminated that really narrow petal that comes from a Nodosa hybrid. A Melody Fair is a tetraploid, so you would expect some of that, but excellent blending of the characteristics of both of those parents. And that's Alan Black's clone. It's possible he picked that out of a bunch of them, but my bet is this was just a cross that was all pretty good. Next. This used to be Yamanara. I'm not sure what the generic name is. This is Orchidum Green Glade. And I've got this plant, and when it blooms, it is green. When it first opens, it's a pretty nice green that grades reasonably quickly into a nice chartreuse. What makes this really interesting is the fact that greens are really hard to come by, especially greens that have large size and nice petals. Interestingly, when you look at what's in the background of this, there is a species called, well, it used to be Encyclia Mariae. It's got a totally different group now that is a naturally green flower. It's not just green when there's an albinistic form, and that is in the background of this, along with Jim Wallace, which is, I think, Digbiana. This has got a lot of different species in the background that have green characteristics, but this is a very unique clone. And I can tell you for sure that it breeds and produces offspring, although I haven't seen any of them, at least of my cross, bloom yet. So to be continued, looking for greens. Next. Black Comet. Every time I see this flower, I just am surprised at how unique it is. The Cochleata was always such a dominant thing in hybrids that very few people played with it very much, because the first time you made the cross, no matter what you crossed it with, it very much looked like the Cochleata. No matter what you used, even when it was a tetraploid combined with this, it still looked like a Cochleata with clamshell orchid, I think we call it, with the upside down lip. But this one is different because it got some color, a really good dose of color from Miva Itoli Noir. That's really a nice thing. And that's Steve's. I think that's been into the club show table multiple times, hasn't it, Sue?
Yeah, for the virtual, yeah.
Yep. Every time I see it, it's just so striking. Okay, next. Leptodes species. Most of the time, the species of Leptodes you see is bicolor. That's the real common one. But here we have a couple of other species that you don't see very regularly. The Polydinocola. Yeah. That's Janus's. And you can sort of see the growth habit of the plant. Real narrow leaves. It looks a little bit like nodosa, the terete type leaves. Flowers are light lavender to white with distinct color on the lip. And you can see that's a pattern for all the three species. The Leptodes politicoi, to the bottom right, is a little bit different in that the flowers are not open well. It might be that they'll open later, but you also see a little more color on them. And that's the kind of variation you would expect. But I got a feeling those are just opening, but some of the Leptodes don't open very well at all. I'm not sure that I know that one species well enough to say it doesn't open. But man, our growers are growing all kinds of things. Okay, next. This is Phalaenopsis ambonensis. This is my clone. This is an interesting clone because of its parentage. My friend H.P. Norton spent years essentially focusing on ambonensis and violacea, selfing, sibbing, trying to make brighter and brighter colors. And he succeeded with respect to both of those species. The problem he had with the ambonensis is he couldn't get rid of the narrow petals and sepals. In ambonensis, the original ones that we had that I first saw in the 80s and early 90s all had a white background with the bars. The yellow ones came along a little later. Not many of us got to see them, but they didn't have very good form. And that's what H.P. Norton worked with. Well, this is a hybrid between the yellow form and the white form, hybrid made by a fella in Tennessee. And H.P. Norton had given me a really nice clone, one of his multi-generational things, had narrow petals, but it had about as bright yellow a color as you'd ever want to see. And I combined the two, gave him the pod, and he told me there were 4 or 5 awards to offspring from it. And I was worried that the white was going to come through, but it just didn't. The only thing you can see of the white is the center part of the flower, where it really does shine through. It doesn't have the yellow going all the way to the column, but its offspring did, and it kept a good shape. But often the case is the first clones, the first plants that come in of a species are from one area, and many times they're distinctly different than even the average of the group. Other times they're the average, and we have these other forms that come in later. But this is the parent in the background of virtually all of the yellow Phalaenopsis that you buy at the stores, is the background of ambonensis. Okay, next. This is a clone that has been around for such a long time. This is Stewartiana Sogo. And Sue, I can't see on my screen whose this is.
It's Deborah's.
That is really beautiful, and it's always been beautiful. It's distinctly different. It branches like crazy. The flowers aren't huge, but it's got these lateral sepals with spots. And this particular clone, I know I've seen this clone around since the 80s in catalogs, has intense pigment in the lateral sepals. Most of them just have a little few spots or a little coloration. But this is one of the ones that have very intense petals. And when you see a finely spotted Phalaenopsis that we call the French spots, this is where they come from. They've been focused and concentrated to get the spots all over the flowers, with the flower size brought in from some of the other Amabilis and those other species in the background. But that's really beautiful and well grown. What you can't see is actually one of my favorite parts of this. The leaves are mottled. They're really beautiful on this particular plant. There are a couple of Phalaenopsis species that have it, and this is one of them. Beautifully grown, nice clone to have. Okay, next. Here again, we have a special clone, Contracte rarichartri. This is Copper State. This is Equestris by Venosa. Venosa was one of the other species in the Phalaenopsis group that brings yellow into the hybrid lineage. And this is a primary. I think we've had one of these in the virtual show table multiple times. And it was made over and over again, and it was always disappointing because they would open a nice color and then they would fade. But there are a number of clones that didn't, and Copper State is one of them. And then Sogo Tris on the left, that's an Equestris hybrid. And the beauty of having equestris in the background that's coming through Beatrice is the fact that the plants aren't large, but they're basically it'll branch at the lower part of the first growth. And often you can have a pot full of 4 or 5 different growing directions, each of them producing multiple spikes. The spikes can branch. They're wonderful things. And when you see the miniatures around on the tables at Lowe's and so forth, and they're small little flowers, almost always you'll see equestris in the background, assuming they actually have names so you can find it. But you can almost be sure it's there. Equestris. Beautiful. Nice growing, people. Okay, next. Taiwan red cat. I still remember the first time I saw one of these things coming there, essentially from a mutation discovered in big nurseries in Taiwan that produces this break. It almost looks like a virus. It is not. And this is one of the ones that has some of the best color and the most uniformity. That the lack of uniformity in the color pattern used to drive judges nuts, but I think they've gotten used to it now. But this one's got great color in the lip, on the picotee on the outside's great color, nice size flowers, beautiful thing. I've seen this in so many clubs because it is a popular thing because it's so pretty, really unique. I think you have this, don't you, Sue?
I got that at the 2008 World Orchid Conference.
I thought I remembered it going back that far. That's a long time ago, Sue.
Yep, it was.
Okay, next, beautiful. Vanda tricolor. A really good time to talk about Vandas because when you ask most people to draw a Vanda, they would never draw one that looks like most of the species. And this is what most of the species look like. And the reason that we're so deceived is because Vanda sandarana, which is really a very distant relative of Vandas, but was grouped in the beginning, that has the big wide petals and sepals and big huge flowers. That is what the hybridizers bred into virtually all the Vandas in the beginning, just picking up a few traits from species like this tricolor of the spots or something else. But these are just beautiful in their own right. The plants are generally smaller. They have less flowers, and you can see they're not necessarily shingled at all like the phals, but that's not uncommon for Vandas. And the thing I really like about a lot of these smaller ones is that they'll flower multiple times a year, or at least there are clones around that will flower multiple times. They produce basal growths real easily, so you can get a massive plant in a hurry. They're typically fragrant. Again, we don't think about that associated with Vandas. And there's been quite a bit of hybridizing, probably the last 15 or 20 years, trying to bring out some of the other characteristics in the Vanda alliance, besides the sandarana form. But this is beautiful. This is can't see who's.
It's Steve's.
Beautiful, beautiful. We just don't see these species in collections much. They also tend to grow too well, so they outgrow their homes real fast, and it's not something that you would grow inside. They typically like real bright light, not as bright as sandarana, but brighter light than cattleyas. Okay, next. Ascocentrum. These now are considered Vandas, but they're so distinctly different that I have a hard time separating them. One almost always knows when you see a Vanda hybrid, and the flowers are smaller and they're nice and round and they're very colorful and red, orange, and actually purple color, that it's got Ascocentrum in the background. Free flowering, I think we've got some good examples of what they look like when they're growing well here. The curvifolium, that's Sue's, and then Ampelasium, that's Deborah's. And look at the difference in colors. Little upright spikes, many times they're branching, but they'll simply cover up the foliage once you get these going really well. And there are a number of species that we used to consider Ascocentrums bred into the Vandaceous line, into the Vanda line especially. And it's almost to the point where you don't even see the characteristics of these flowers anymore, but you still see the colors coming through in Vandas that are multiple generations away from the species. They like bright light, lots of water, lots of heat. Not like we have any lack of that here in Northeast Florida.
Yeah.
Okay, next. Renanthua Wynn McFeeters. This is a primary hybrid, Bella by Monashika. This is exactly what the Renanthera almost all look like in terms of the form. The form is a distinct characteristic. Most of them have bars or spots. Many of them are red. And the downside to them is that they have a growth pattern that grows up very, very fast. And for some hybrids, they won't bloom until the plants get really big and mature. And that's turned off an awful lot of growers. They are closely related to Vandas. They interbreed with Vandas, and you could find Vanda hybrids. And when you see them mixed with Vandas, almost always you see the Renanthera form as a dominant one. But this is a primary, and the efforts have been all along to try and get Vanda or Renantheras that are smaller in stature in terms of growth and bloom earlier. And there are quite a few of those around now. So they can be obtained that don't get huge. You just have to make sure you ask the grower you're buying them from how big the plant gets and when it will flower. And whose is this, Sue?
That's Leslie's.
That's Leslie's. I think I've seen that one before. Okay, next. Snow Gem HTR, an interesting hybrid. We used to see these hybrids around, and then they just suddenly disappeared. The Philippinensis and the Quisambiнгii make beautiful flowers, beautiful clusters of white or pinkish flowers. And notice the little nectary on the flowers, designed for a hummingbird, or I think that's a hummingbird in this case, but I can't remember for sure, or a moth, one or the other. Typically, when you see moth flowers, they're white because the moths are out at night, and white basically shows up better at night. This is yours, Sue.
It's a cute little thing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of them. And these are one of those species that does do fairly well in lower light and in windowsills. And some of the best clones I've ever seen were grown under windowsills, or at least under lights. Because, you know, if you've got one of these and you don't have a lot of plants, you can give it a lot of attention and keep a good eye on it and get maximum flowers out of it. Cute, cute, cute. That's got the cute factor going for it. Okay, next. Wilbur Chang, Kinolabium biarunculatum.
Well, that should be, I'm missing a C there.
Carunculatum.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking that didn't seem right.
No,
okay. I wrote it down correctly, but it didn't say it. The Kinolabium is such a dominant parent and is used because it's a dominant parent, and its dominance extends to the flowers, in that flowers tend to be large if a Kinolabium is a parent or even a grandparent. And you can see the Kinolabium striping and so forth. The Carunculatum has got nice color too. It's a really good combination of two different species to get something that's actually better. The inflorescence is not as big on a Wilbur Chang as the Kinolabium, and that's a real important characteristic for the bulbos, some of which, like the Kinolabium, have pretty long inflorescences. Okay, next. My goodness, Janice. I think you need to grow that a little better. Wow. And this is what you can do with the Desia discolor. I mean, this is what is the classic jewel orchid. And you can see the leaves are all really nice. I'm not sure which form this is. It looks like it's got the darker leaves, but you can't really tell in this
the more
light.
traditional form, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured. But that has bloomed extraordinarily well. These will grow under extremely low light, but they do better under the, what I would say, Phalaenopsis light. You'll get more flowers, bigger plants. And all I can say is, if you want to know how to grow these, you have to talk to Janice, because she clearly knows how to do it. That's beautifully grown. Okay, next. Gastricillus calceolaris. This is Leslie's. And I know from knowing Leslie that she gravitates towards unusual things. But this is a really beautiful thing. All the little flowers emerging from the bracts on the leaves, as I recall. And they will simply surround the plant. And you can see, you can't even see the center of this plant. It's got so many flowers. Don't know what more you could say about this. I'm not sure I've ever seen a hybrid with it, but it would be a pretty little thing to make a hybrid with. Not sure what happens when you do that, but that's for somebody who likes this group more than I do to try. That's the problem with orchids. If you decide you're going to get into hybridizing, you got to decide what you like the best. And there's some beautiful clones out there, beautiful species that you look at and think, what a great parent that would make. But often you don't have something good to pair it with that makes something better. And sometimes the species is the better. But you never know till you try. So that's Leslie's too. And Leslie's growing that extremely well. And that's a little plant, a little thing as I recall, not a big plant. Okay, next.
I finally got one to bloom.
Paphinia nudecari. This is Sue's, apparently. The flowers on this are just remarkably beautiful. And some of the species have very large flowers too. Typically, they don't have a lot of flowers on a stem. 2 or 3 is what you normally see. And this species I don't know, Sue, so I don't know much more I could tell you about it other than it's really beautiful. Is this open or just opening?
Well, this is the first bloom of a little seedling, so probably the next time around, assuming there is a next time around, should be better. But I was so tickled to have one bloom, I couldn't help myself but to include it.
Well, I don't blame you because we don't see this very often. I know I've seen this in shows that are just beautiful things, large plants and so forth, but you don't see it very often.
Mm-mm.
And as I remember when I was in the judging program, almost every time one of these was in a show, one of the judges would pull it to look at it because it was so unusual. Most of them didn't know whether it was good, bad, or what.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really striking. Next year we'll see how well you do.
I'll cross my fingers.
Okay, next. Phaius, microburst, and I see they've changed this to Gastrophaius, but this is an awarded clone. And Phaius tankervilliae was the only one around for the longest period of time. And in South Florida, it's grown outside as just a garden plant and was always beautiful during certain times of the year. People who knew how to grow it would get massive numbers of flowers, and it multiplies. And then some smart person started trying hybridizing it, and they produced a range of hybrids with different color forms. And some of them, I think, actually grow just as well as the tankervilliae. But I haven't seen these growing in the wild in South Florida, but I don't spend much time there. But this is really beautiful. This is Deborah's, and I'm wondering whether she's growing this in her yard or in a pot.
I think that's in a pot.
I suspect you could probably grow these outside.
Yeah, I grow them. I've got some in the ground.
Do you? Okay. Yeah, I mean, Steve says that this tankervilliae has naturalized in Hawaii, and I remember seeing them along the roadside in a couple of places, just growing like weeds. So they're clearly producing seeds and germinating in Hawaii. But then again, everything grows in Hawaii.
Exactly.
Which is why they have trouble with exotic species. Okay, next. Dendrochilum. This is yours, Sue. This is Glumaceum. Glumaceum is a beautiful species. And like all the dendrochilums, the flowers are very small and produced on long inflorescences, some longer in different species. This is a nice clone. The flowers are just right, inflorescence just the right length. And you can see if you look at the inflorescence, the flowers at the very top, the ones that most recently or the oldest flowers are already starting to dry up, and then the ones on the bottom are starting to open. So these will be in bloom for months once you get a large plant, just because you'll have flowers for months. The real trick is to get a big plant with lots of growths, and then the inflorescence will almost just blot out the plant itself when they're in full bloom. And Sue says this is labeled as convolvulariforme.
Whatever. I asked Marv and he says, nope, He says it's a glumaceum, so.
Marv knows. And one
Yeah.
of the things that you run into is when collectors find something that looks a little different, they'll attach another name for it so that people who collect dendrochilums will see it and say, oh, that's a new species. I got to have that one. So it's not uncommon to see multiple names on a species. And I tell people always, whenever you get something, make sure you keep the original tag, no matter what the name has changed to. Keep that original tag in case some taxonomist down the road decides it was a different thing after all. So just go ahead and keep the original one, keep the new one too. That way you'll really have a choice. Okay, next. Ornithocephalus gladiatus. That's a beautiful little miniature. This would definitely be considered a miniature in the judging program. And look at the flowers on that thing. I can see why it's called gladiatus. It's got some of the same characteristics as a gladiola. Beautiful inflorescence with lots of flowers. And these are little fan-shaped growths, fairly easy to grow. And you can see this is Leslie's being grown on a little piece of tree fern, and that is exactly what they like. The one thing I will tell you about these is they really need good water. So if you get one of these, it doesn't take much water to keep it going. You don't have to buy gallons and gallons. You can just get a little spray bottle and keep it growing. If you've got really bad water, if you've got good water, you don't have to worry about it. But being grown very well by Leslie. Okay. Next.
All right, Courtney, you were wonderful as you always are.
Well, I appreciate all of the photos that folks send in, and I love the comments that we get along the way too. It'd be nice having Jim Roberts back. I hope that's still going to happen soon. But
Yep, it is. He's on tap for next month, and we're going to be talking about growing orchids outdoors.
yeah, that's a good topic for us, even though we can't do it, keep them out all year long.
That's right.
This is a pretty photo, so we'll look forward to it.
Yep,
Thanks everybody for sending
thank
photos.
you, Courtney, and thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.
See you next month.
Thank you.
Happy
I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Courtney. Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.